Okay, today for literacy, your objective is students will be able to identify central idea in several small sections of Anne Frank and cite evidence to support those central ideas. Success criteria: I can and will review Act 1, Scene 1. I can read with enthusiasm Anne Frank Act 1, Scene 2 to line 319. And I can identify central idea and support with textual evidence. What happened in Act 1, Scene 1? Well, we find out the setting. It's a very small annex, which is a small room, attic-y room above Mr. Frank's business. Act 1, Scene 1 is set in 1945, so it's after the actual setting of the play. It's after Mr. Frank is released from the concentration camp. His whole family has died. He is back at the annex. He's met Meep there. Meep is now pregnant. And Mr. Frank is telling her he cannot stand to stay in Amsterdam. He's got to go somewhere else where there's not so many horrible memories. And he tells her to burn everything, and she says, even this, and it was Anne's diary. Mr. Frank starts reading her diary, and that's where we left off. This is kind of a visual image of what the annex is. There's one main room. It's like the small kitchen. They have like a couch, a wood-burning stove. It's also Mr. and Mrs. Frank's bedroom. There's a little upstairs where it's Mr. and Mrs. Van Dan's bedroom, which is not very big. There's Anne and Margot's bedroom. There's one, they call it a WC water closet. It's one bathroom. It has a toilet, a shower, but it's one. So there's a family of three, Mr. and Mrs. Van Dan and Peter. There's a family of four sharing one bathroom. And then there's a tiny hallway that leads to the attic, and that's Peter's room. It's not even a room, it's a hall. Think about that. So it's very small space. These are the characters that we'll be reading today. Act 1, Scene 2 to line 319. You need to make a prediction before you start reading. We know the Frank and Van Dan families are going to be hiding in the attic together. Make a prediction on how you think the initial meeting in the annex will go and explain why you predict that. So do that in your Pear Deck now. Okay, Scene 2 starts. It is early morning, July 1942. The rooms are bare as before, but they are now clean and orderly. Mr. Van Dan, a tall, portly man in his late 40s, is in the main room, pacing up and down, nervously smoking a cigarette. His clothes and overcoat are expensive and well cut. Mrs. Van Dan sits on the couch, clutching her possessions, a hat box, bags, etc. She is a pretty woman in her early 40s. She wears a fur coat over her other clothes. Peter Van Dan is standing at the window of the room on the right, looking down at the street below. He is a shy, awkward boy of 16. He wears a cap, a raincoat, and long Dutch trousers like +4s. At his feet is a black case, a carrier for his cat. The yellow Star of David is conspicuous on all of their clothes. It means it's very apparent. They're all wearing the yellow Star of David. It stands out. Mrs. Van Dan, rising, nervous, excited. Something's happened to them. I know it. Now, Curly, Mr. Frank said they'd be here by 7 o'clock. He said, they have 2 miles to walk. You can't expect. They've been picked up. That's what's happened. They've been taken. Mr. Van Dan indicates that he hears someone coming. You see? Peter takes up his carrier and his school bag, etc., and goes into the main room as Mr. Frank comes up the stairwell from below. Mr. Frank looks much younger now. His movements are brisk, his manner confident. He wears an overcoat and carries his hat and a small cardboard box. He crosses to the Van Dans, shaking hands with each of them. Remember, in the first scene, Mr. Frank is older. He looks ill, he's very frail, and his clothes are threadbare. That's because it was after the concentration camp. Now we're back 3 years before, in 1942, how he looks before that experience. Mr. Frank says to Mrs. Van Dan, Mrs. Van Dan, Mr. Van Dan, Peter, then in explanation of their lateness. Pause here. For this slide only, write what you believe the main idea is, like what is the main point of this part of the play. What are we learning about the characters and what's happening? And then you need to cite a text evidence line number. So if you look right here, this is line 150. If you want to quote something from down here, you need to count 151, 152, 153, 154. That's how that works. Write your response now. There were too many of the green police on the streets. We had to take the long way around. Up the steps come Margot Frank, Mrs. Frank, Meep, not pregnant now, and Mr. Crawler. All of them carry bags, packages, and so forth. The Star of David is conspicuous on all the Franks' clothing. Margot is 18, beautiful, quiet, shy. Mrs. Frank is a young mother, gently bred, reserved. She, like Mr. Frank, has a slight German accent. Mr. Crawler is a Dutchman, dependable, kindly. As Mr. Crawler and Meep go upstage to put down their parcels, Mrs. Frank turns back to call Anne. Anne! Anne comes running up the stairs. She is 13, quick in her movements, interested in everything, mercurial in her emotions. She wears a cape, long wool socks, and carries a school bag. Mr. Frank's introducing them. My wife, Edith, Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan. Mrs. Frank hurries over, shaking hands with them. Their son, Peter. My daughters, Margot and Anne. Anne gives a polite curtsy as she shakes Mr. Van Daan's hand. Then she immediately starts off on a tour of investigation of her new home, going upstairs to the attic room. Meep and Mr. Crawler are putting the various things they have brought on the shelves. I'm sorry there's still so much confusion. Please, don't think of it. After all, we'll have plenty of leisure to arrange everything ourselves. To Mrs. Frank, we put the stores of food you sent in here. Your drugs are here, soap, linen here. Thank you, Meep. I made up the beds the way Mr. Frank and Mr. Crawler said. She starts out. Forgive me, I have to hurry. I've got to go to the other side of town to get some ration books for you. Pause this video and go tell the main idea in your Pear Deck slide. And the text evidence, the line number. Ration books? If they see our names on ration books, they'll know we're here. There isn't anything. Don't worry, your names won't be on them, as she hurries out. I'll be up later. Thank you, Meep. To Mrs. Crawler. It's illegal then, the ration books? We've never done anything illegal. We won't be living here exactly according to regulations. As Mr. Crawler reassures Mrs. Frank, he takes various small things, such as matches, soap, etc., from his pockets, handing them to her. This isn't the black market, Mrs. Frank. This is what we call the white market, helping all of the hundreds and hundreds who are hiding out in Amsterdam. Carry-on is heard playing the quarter hour before 8. Mr. Crawler looks at his watch. Anne stops at the window as she comes down the stairs. It's the Westertoren. I must go. I must be out of here and downstairs in the office before the workmen get here. He starts for the stairs leading out. Meep or I, or both of us, will be up each day to bring you food and news and find out what your needs are. Tomorrow I'll get you a better bolt for the door at the foot of the stairs. It needs a bolt that you can throw yourself and open only at our signal. To Mr. Frank, oh, you'll tell them about the noise? I'll tell them. Goodbye then for the moment. I'll come up again after the workmen leave. Goodbye, Mr. Crawler. Shaking his hand. How can we thank you? The others murmur their goodbyes. Pause this video and write the main idea for this slide and your text evidence. I never thought I'd live to see the day when a man like Mr. Frank would have to go into hiding. When you think. He breaks off, going out. Mr. Frank follows him down the steps, bolting the door after him. In the interval before he returns, Peter goes over to Margot, shaking hands with her. As Mr. Frank comes back up the steps, Mrs. Frank questions him anxiously. What did he mean about the noise? First, let us take off some of these clothes. They all start to take off garment after garment. On each of their coats, sweaters, blouses, suits, dresses is another star, a yellow Star of David. Mr. and Mrs. Frank are underdressed quite simply. The others wear several things, a sweater, extra dresses, bathrobes, aprons, nightgowns, etc. They piled all those clothes on so they wouldn't need as many suitcases. It's a wonder we weren't arrested walking along the streets, Petronella with a fur coat in July, and that cat of Peter's crying all the way. As she is removing a pair of panties. A cat? Mrs. Frank is shocked. Anne, please. It's all right. I've got on 3 more. She pulls off 2 more. Finally, as they have all removed their surplus clothes, they look to Mr. Frank, waiting for him to speak. Now about the noise. While the men are in the building below, we must have complete quiet. Every sound can be heard down there, not only in the workrooms, but in the offices too. The men come at about 8:30 and leave at about 5:30. So to be perfectly safe, from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening, we must move only when it is necessary, and then in stockinged feet. We must not speak above a whisper. We must not run any water. We cannot use the sink or even, forgive me, the water closet. The pipes go down through the workrooms. It would be heard. No trash. Mr. Frank stops abruptly as he hears the sound of marching feet from the street below. Everyone is motionless, paralyzed with fear. Okay, stop right there. Pause and go answer the main idea with text evidence. Mr. Frank goes quietly into the room on the right to look down out of the window. Anne runs after him, peering out with him. The tramping feet pass without stopping. The tension is relieved. Mr. Frank, followed by Anne, returns to the main room and resumes his instructions to the group. No trash must ever be thrown out, which might reveal that someone is living up here, not even a potato paring. We must burn everything in the stove at night. This is the way we must live until it is over, if we are to survive. There is silence for a second. Until it is over, Mr. Frank reassuringly. After 6, we can move about. We can talk and laugh and have our supper and read and play games, just as we would at home. He looks at his watch. And now I think it would be wise if we all went to our rooms and were settled before 8 o'clock. Mrs. Van Daan, you and your husband will be upstairs. I regret that there's no place up there for Peter, but he will be here near us. This will be our common room, where we'll meet to talk and eat and read like one family. And where do you and Mrs. Frank sleep? This room is also our bedroom. That isn't right. We'll sleep here and you take the room upstairs. It's your place. Please, I've thought this out for weeks. It's the best arrangement, the only arrangement. To Mr. Frank. Never can we thank you. Then to Mrs. Frank. I don't know what would have happened to us if it hadn't been for Mr. Frank. You don't know how your husband helped me when I came to this country. Knowing no one, not able to speak the language, I can never repay him for that. Going to Van Daan. May I help you with your things? Okay, this is where you stop and do the main idea for the slide. No, to Mrs. Van Daan. Come along, Leafy. Mrs. Van Daan, you'll be all right, Peter? You're not afraid? Peter's embarrassed. Please, Mother. They start up the stairs to the attic room above. Mr. Frank turns to Mrs. Frank. This is where we're stopping for today. And Mr. Van Daan calls Mrs. Van Daan Leafy a whole lot, meaning little darling. Make sure you do all